I found the bridge on a night when clocks were tired of being sure. The sky above the depot had no stars, only a dark so kindly made that it did not need to glitter to prove it was there. A low bell hummed once, no announcement, only a reminder that distance can be patient. And the platform accepted my steps, the way old wood accepts a friend it has seen often. The sign at the entrance was small, easy to miss if you hurried, and so I did not hurry. It read, "Between districts, cross by breath, not by timetable." A seated attendant lifted a hand in greeting without looking up. The desk in front of them held a ledger, a cup of something that made steam into a halo, and a drawer I decided to call quiet. I stood with the care you use when standing in a room that knows what to do without you. The attendant opened the drawer, took out a slender ticket, and slid it toward me. The paper was warm, as if the drawer had been teaching it to be kind. Printed on its face were 4 words, "Ticket of quiet return." "Am I going far?" I asked, but only inside my mouth, where questions can be shy without being lost. The attendant smiled, the way lamps smile when windows are clean. They tapped the bell with a fingertip, and the sound drifted across the tracks like a soft hand testing water. Beyond the platform, the bridge began. It did not arch, it did not boast. It slid out over the dark with the humility of a sentence that has decided to learn commas. Lanterns stood at intervals, each cupped in a hood to keep the light from trying too hard. Between one lantern and the next, shadow arranged itself into a floor. In the distance, stations suggested themselves, small domes, low roofs, rooms that knew the names of waiting. The night held everything steady. I slipped the ticket into my pocket and stepped forward. The wood beneath my feet was neither old nor new. It was ready. I kept my pace level as if the bridge listened, and perhaps it did, because the planks began to remember me. Between the first lantern and the second, the dark felt like a breath held on purpose. At the second lantern, wind gathered enough to say hello, and nothing more. I let it. The bridge did not sway. The bridge had learned long ago that, as the sign said, crossings are done by breath. The first station wore a roof of quietly hammered metal and windows that favored fog. Inside, benches stood with their backs to shame and their faces to rest. A sign above the doorway read, "Platform of soft footsteps." I stood there until my breathing matched the hush of a room that has agreed to hold fewer footsteps than it hears. The walls did not echo, they were trained. In one corner, an elderly rug explained to the floor how to receive the weight of arrivals without complaining. I took the ticket from my pocket and set it on the bench beside me. The paper remembered the drawer, and so I remembered the platform where I had first seen the bridge. Memory is just paper that has been taught to keep the right temperature. A clock in the wall refused to tick. Its hands moved as if they resented the swear word of certainty. I did not mind. The bridge was not about minutes, it was about crossings. When I rose to leave, the bench gave back a fraction of my shape, as if reluctant. At the door, I turned and thanked it. The bench had been waiting all day to be thanked. It accepted the gratitude and forgot it in the healthy way that furniture does. I stepped out to the edge, and the planks resumed their work, carrying without claiming. 2 lanterns later, a bell found me. It did not ring loud. It rang close. "Archivist's bell," said a plaque on the post near the sound. The metal of it had been poured for ceremony and then trained for mercy. I rested my hand on the bell's lip, and the air gathered into order, the way a blanket learns the shape of the person it keeps. "I am crossing," I told the bell, "not to arrive, but to keep the habit of arriving." The bell approved by not answering. The second station announced itself with a low whistle that did not bother the night. "Exchange House," said the sign. Half the windows were open enough to count as forgiveness. A table stretched along the wall, and upon it sat boxes with small cards in front of each. The writing on the cards had been taught to be neat by a teacher who loved chalk. "Leave one gentle dream. Take one gentle dream. No refunds, only returns." No names. They would only get in the way. I stood at the table and let my tongue remember the taste of sleep, the friendly warmth behind the throat, the slight heaviness in the eyes, the way the body goes from being a building to being weather. In the first box, dreams of kitchens cooling after bread. In the second, dreams of the sea when it has chosen to be a library. In the third, dreams of a door unlocked by the soft click of a key that has learned you. I opened a box labeled Lantern Walks and felt the sense of being led without being pulled. I closed it. It belonged to someone else, but for a moment it had borrowed my hands. What dream could I leave? I had one that remembered a window where snow and quiet negotiated who should have the last word. I set that dream, folded small, into a box where it would be found by a person who needed the exact conversation it contained. In exchange, I took a dream the size of a cup, warm ceramic, steam convincing the nose to slow down. My palms kept the cup, my mouth kept the steam, the dream kept me. Outside, the bridge had added a railing where it had been shy, as if to say that sometimes assurance is a gift and not an argument. I walked on. The night remained deliberate. The lanterns decided which moths to refuse without making a fuss about it. Between the exchange house and the next station, the planks grew quieter still. The dark leaned into listening. In the third lantern circle, a figure sat with their feet over the side. I could not see a face. I did not need to. Their hands held a notebook open to a page that had become gentle by being read often. We nodded at each other in the way travelers trade a brevity that respects the long. I did not ask what they wrote. They did not ask what I carried. The bridge liked us both for that. The third station stood low and honest on the span, a room that had learned daylight and kept it like a secret. 2 armchairs waited with a dignity that did not depend on being chosen. A cupboard held blankets the color of reasons. In the center of the room, a round clock had no numbers, only small leaves where numbers might have been, and the words "Stay a while" laid around the face, as if the clock had joined a choir. I lay one of the blankets over my knees and watched the leaves move. Staying a while is difficult for breeds of people who think crossing is the only way to justify a bridge. The chairs forgave me that thought for having been a thought. When I left, I folded the blanket with the loyalty of someone who has just returned an object to the dignity it arrived with. The chair did not remark on my care. Chairs are wise that way. The bridge took me back into its breath. Wind decided to practice. Not much, just enough to explain that air has its own language. A new kind of light spooled upward from the planks, the lanterns choosing to glow from below as if the bridge were learning how to be a hallway. I slowed. The dark did not resist me. The fourth station called itself Waymarkers. It was not a building. It was an interval of the bridge where the planks had been inlaid with symbols that might once have been letters and had now become kindly meanings. I slowed, the toe of my boot on a spiral. It felt like laughter kept modest. A triangle warmed under my other foot, which reminded me of the standing you do while deciding how to answer a question you are not required to answer at all. A long line offered my heel a softness that might have been sand. Waymarkers helps you notice how often you've already been where you are going. Back where the railing turned a polite corner, a narrow bench held a tin of pencils. On the lid, the words borrow and return, in either order. I sketched nothing and everything. Two parallel lines that did not meet and did not mind. A small square with 4 windows, a curve that would someday be a door. I returned the pencil by letting it rest where it had been putting up a brave face. The bridge tucked the tin back into its breath. At the next lantern, the post bore a small sign I had to bend to read. Bridge of Breaths. The wood here had learned a rhythm. I matched it, step to breath, breath to step, until the distinction stopped fussing over itself. A train passed beneath us, a many-windowed shadow that agreeable sleepers had taught to go slowly. Its cars carried rooms where people were escaping towards things they had already found. I waved. The bridge sent my wave down like a leaf learning water. Halfway across the breath bridge, the air smelled of rain telling secrets to stone. No clouds, no wet. Only the promise that someone was being watered somewhere. The promise was sufficient. I kept walking. The fifth station wore a roof of glass that had practiced listening to weather for years and now did it by habit. Inside, tables were arranged with modest intelligence. It was called the Scriptorium of Unwritten Answers. Each table held paper, but the paper was shy and did not look at me. I sat. My hands made a posture that could be called writing. The paper leaned closer without moving. I wrote 3 words I had needed to hear a year ago. The words did not accuse me of being late. They entered the paper as if the paper had been keeping a place for them. Then I wrote 1 word I hoped to feel tomorrow. The word accepted its temporary truth and promised to become permanent at its own speed. Around me, chairs rearranged themselves by ½ inches until the room fit everyone who would ever use it. Out on the bridge again, I read the ticket. Ticket of quiet return. Return to what? Not to home. Home is not a dot on a map. Home is the way maps fold when you hold them. The bridge was teaching me that. I slipped the ticket back into its pocket. A pocket is a domestic promise. The lanterns started telling me stories in a language I did not know, but trusted. They flickered in little sequences that said, a person stood here once and decided that apologizing was easier than explaining. Another stood here and taught their feet to call a new street by its right name. A third did nothing at all in this circle and found out that doing nothing sometimes repairs things that would get worse if you helped. I kept pace with the lantern's grammar until my body knew it well enough that my mind could nap without losing its place in the book. The 6th station was small enough to be a rumor and large enough to be a promise. Caretaker's Nook. read a card that had known many hands. A pot of tea had been poured at the moment that makes leaf and heat shake hands. Beside the pot, an hourglass turned itself, as if duty and pleasure were not competitors. I poured a cup and watched steam decide what to become. The first sip put my shoulders one rung lower on the ladder they had been climbing for no reason. The second sip brought my voice back from where it had been hiding behind my tongue. The third sip explained that thank yous can be silent and still count. I left a note beneath the cup for the caretaker who would arrive later. It said nothing that could change the world. It said enough to light a small corner for a few minutes. This is the scale at which bridges prefer to work. Past the Nook, the boards darkened slightly. Not menace, privacy. The lanterns pulled their light closer. On the right, a low wall rose to guard a view of nothing spectacular. I loved it for that. There is too much spectacle for tired eyes. A plaque inlaid at elbow height read, "Look here when you want to see." The wood held the touch of thousands of forearms. I added mine. We became a crowd without making noise. The seventh station met me with a laugh it tried not to wake. Lost and found. Not objects, not umbrellas and gloves. The shelves here kept small habits that people had mislaid, remembering to drink water before coffee, forgiving your own yawn, saying the name of the month out loud on the first day just to see if it still fits. I checked out a habit I had once owned and forgotten, putting my hand on the doorframe before I leave to remind both of us that departures can be tender. The clerk nodded. The ledger took my name without keeping it. The bridge made room for my reclaimed habit in its sprintless heart. Along the span, a sign hung on a single nail, as if ready to fall and perfectly secure. Slow lane. I entered. The planks beneath the words had agreed to a speed slower than thinking. The lanterns widened their circles so that overlap became a soft, shared light. Another traveler walked ahead, 10 paces, then 9, then 10 again. We kept the distance as if it were part of the ritual. It was. The 8th station leaned toward the left, the way a friend leans when you are saying something that will take a while. Listening post. No chairs, only standing. The walls produced a hum that matched the frequency at which people confess the parts of themselves they love the least. I listened until I remembered to be kind to a version of me that had done its best with the tools it had been given. When I left, the wall hummed a different note, as if to say, "It counts. Even when no one heard it but you, it counts." The bridge grew very quiet then, as if it had walked ahead to make sure the next part was properly set. Railing on both sides, lanterns every few breaths, the dark humming a note light could not hear. I thought of the ticket in my pocket and how it had been warm in a drawer before being warm in my hand. Warmth is an old language. We learn it before words. The 9th station was the last. I knew it by the way the air stood reverently in front of it. A small arch welcomed me without flourish. Above the arch, 4 words. The last unlit lantern. Inside, a single pedestal held a lantern hooded in a cloth that had learned to be soft by being washed with patience. A small book lay open on a lectern, for the ones not here yet. The pages held no notes, only names of stations, and a blank line beneath each for the names of travelers who had left a light. The blank line under Last Unlit Lantern made a space in the air. I lifted the hood from the lantern. The wick waited without anxiety. On the pedestal's edge, a box of matches sat like a faithful pet. I took one. It smelled of childhood and unafraid nights. I struck it on the box. The flame learned itself immediately, and then learned the wick. Light gathered in the glass as if happy to have been asked. I set the match down and watched the smoke choose to be story and then choose to be gone. The lantern did not blaze, it breathed. Its glow reached exactly to the door and then said, "That is enough," to itself, in a voice I trusted. I signed the blank line with a name that had been mine long enough to have forgiven me many times. The lantern did not thank me. Lanterns have better things to do than flatter. There was a small drawer in the lectern. Because I had learned the bridge's habits, I looked. Inside lay small slips of paper, each with a sentence someone had once been glad to hear. I read 3. They did not demand anything from me. I took one that said, "Rest is not absence." I put it in my pocket with the ticket. They got along immediately. When I stepped back onto the span, the lantern's glow followed me to the threshold and then stayed where it was, steady as a friend who has learned not to walk you to the door every time, because sometimes leaving alone is part of the medicine. The bridge was now slightly brighter than when I had begun. This is how a place thanks you without making you blush. The way back required fewer words. The stations had nothing new to prove. They adjusted their furniture by half inches to accommodate what the last lantern had added to me. The Waymakers hummed at my heels. The Scriptorium nodded as if some answer had written itself. The Caretaker's Nook refilled the pot, perhaps for someone who was still on their way. The exchange house kept my snow-windowed dream for a pair of hands that would be glad to warm it. The platform of soft footsteps practiced being floor. Near the entrance, the attendant rested the pen on the ledger so it would not roll. They did not ask how it had gone. They knew. The bell, tapped once, released a sound that would travel the whole bridge before deciding whether to return. I set the ticket of quiet return on the desk and slid it gently under the weight of a small stone so it would not drift. The attendant cocked their head as if listening to the match smoke I still carried in my hair. Then they opened the drawer and returned the ticket to warmth. All journeys deserve a place to be kept when not being used. At the foot of the stairs, I turned back once, because night likes to be given this courtesy. The bridge stretched patiently away, lantern after lantern, station after station, a line learning how to be a lullaby. Somewhere near the center, a traveler read from a notebook, and the wood kept their feet above the dark with more competence than most promises can manage. I felt sleep loosen its shoulders and take my hand. I walked away not to leave, but to carry. The bridge came with me in a dozen small ways, the way my breath arranged itself, the way my pocket felt heavier in the best places, the way my steps learned to fall softer, as if the earth under me had trained with the planks. At my door, I put my hand on the frame and remembered the habit I had checked out at Lost and Found. The door warmed. I warmed. Inside, a room considered lamps and decided one was enough. I set the slip of paper on the table. Rest is not absence. The table agreed by holding it. When I lay down, the mattress learned me again. In the quiet, I could hear a bell carried on wind from a bridge that would serve someone else tonight. I trusted the lantern I had lit to give new travelers just enough light to see their hands, their ticket, and the first rail, no more. More would be unkind. I closed my eyes. The bridge continued, as bridges must, each plank and lantern doing its small work without applause. Between districts, sleep and waking made their exchange, one gentle dream for another, breath for breath, step for step, until morning would find me already across. But the bridge was not finished with me, or perhaps I was not finished with the bridge. I lay there, eyes closed, and felt the planks consider another route, a longer kindness. The lanterns dimmed and brightened in a slow sequence, inviting without insisting. I rose, not to conquer distance, only to keep breathing where breath was welcome. The span widened by a step, then another, as if making room for a company I could not see. I walked on. A low structure waited, modest as a coat left on a chair. The tiny sign above its door read, "Window Hall." Inside were only windows, no walls between them, just frames holding 100 versions of evening, rain deciding to be gentle, snow practicing the art of landing without ceremony, wind over a field that had learned how to bow. A small plaque asked me to look through, not at. I obeyed and felt the difference. The scenes came toward me without flinching. In one pane, a city released its noise and kept only lamps. In another, a kitchen folded itself around steam. In a third, the moon rehearsed fullness and decided to wait. When I stepped back out, the railing felt warm, as if it had borrowed a little heat from every window for travelers with cool hands. 2 lanterns later, an impossible postbox stood where no street did. "Post of slow letters," said the brass plate. On a shelf beside it lay notepaper with a cedar scent and a pencil that had learned not to squeak. I wrote to a day that had done its best with me. "I saw you. I was hurried and didn't admit it. Thank you for waiting while I found the right pace." The box accepted the letter without ceremony. On a second sheet, I addressed the hour between work and rest and left the page blank. The unwritten part was the truth I meant. A short staircase descended into darkness that smelled faintly of salt and sleep. A placard called it the sea stair. I went down 3 steps and stopped. The 4th was already ocean in the way a dream is already morning. The water was only the idea of water, cool enough to teach the skin to listen. I sat and let waves that weren't there come and go, each wash carrying a word: rest, return, remember. I carried them back up like shells. You don't need to prove you were at the shore. Farther on, glass walls and a roof that had memorized light made a conservatory built right onto the span. A note hanging from a stem named it the Clock Conservatory. Clocks grew there, hands like leaves, faces soft, none of them ticking. Time photosynthesized. A sign asked me to stand for a minute that would last as long as it should. The minute widened until it fit my shoulders, and then smallered until it fit my pulse. When I left, I suspected that many minutes in the world had simply been harvested too early. Night decided to bloom across the planks, a garden labeled with wooden stakes. First sleep, second sleep, nap taken seriously. Small markers taught the difference between drowsy and ready. A narrow path called "If You Wake" curved gently around a stand of low trees and returned without boasting. I followed it and did not apologize for waking. A gardener tipped a brim without looking up. The watering can poured the sound of distant rain. A row of stalls appeared with awnings the color of reasons. A quiet banner called it the Hush Market. Nothing could be carried off in a bag. One stall traded noises you no longer need for silences you had forgotten. Another offered permission to speak slowly in exchange for one deep breath. I bartered away a habit of finishing other people's sentences for a small pouch labeled "Let Them Land." I tied it at my belt and felt lighter by an argument I would not need to have. A square room waited with its door ajar and the smell of pencil in the air. Unsent letters north. A rule card on the table said, "Write it here, mean it here, carry the meaning, not the paper." I wrote 6 sentences and folded the page without tearing it out. The room accepted the unsentness and returned me to the span, carrying only the worth of what I'd said. At midspan, a small landing held a boat, though water did not. A wooden board simply read, "Gentle Ferryman." I stepped in. The bench learned my name. We crossed from one kind of quiet to another. No distance, all difference. On the far side, the ferryman tilted an oar in a gesture that meant, "Go well." Behind me, the boat remained exactly where it had been, and yet had carried many. A long bench along the rail was carved with first names and soft nicknames homes give. No dates, no claims. I traced 3 with a fingertip until my finger remembered the people they might have belonged to. Kindness was enough biography. The span widened into a circle of instruments on stands, violins without strings, cellos that hummed, flutes whose holes were pauses. The floor letters, modest as footprints, called it the Silent Orchestra. I raised my hands, not to conduct, but to admit music happens in the body. A melody arrived at the edge of hearing, performed by breath, wood, and the scrim of night. When I lowered my hands, nothing changed. Music already happening does not require you, and that is the gift. A balcony hung just beyond the rail, held by nothing I would have trusted anywhere else. The plaque said, "Rainkeeper's Balcony." Far below, weather practiced falling on fields that had asked nicely. The smell of petrichor rose as if the earth remembered how to write to the sky. I learned the first letters of the language and saved the rest for later. The planks darkened, the lantern circles drew in, and the rail learned the weight of forearms that had weighed decisions here. The post named it the Listening Bridge. I moved slower than needed. The night answered questions I hadn't asked with a kind of silence that means, "I'm here." I said thank you by not speaking. Another exchange house waited, older in the good ways. The same card on the table. Leave one gentle dream, take one gentle dream. This time, I returned the warm ceramic cup for someone whose hands had been cold too long, and took a nearly weightless dream of walking into a room and being welcomed by a chair that remembered me. The bridge changed underfoot from wood to something like memory laminated to carry weight. An inset harbor held coiled ropes and modest bollards, harbor of low voices. Conversations were kept there, not recorded, kept, in the tone people use when they would like to be sure and are willing to be kind instead. I rested on the rail and listened to the rumor of courage. Courage dislikes being stolen, it follows when invited. A room lined with calendars showed only moons, only tides, only the word today written in many hands. A guidebook with one sentence urged, "Make a small promise you can keep while breathing slowly." I promised to drink water before measuring anything. The calendar approved by staying blank. An arch where the lanterns spaced themselves a little wider called itself the Gate of Second Chances. Nothing flashy happened. A bell on a modest rope waited. I rang it, not loudly, and something in my chest rang back, slightly truer. Beyond the arch, the boards felt newly oiled. A narrow room offered 2 chairs and a lamp. Early good nights. A sign asked me to say good night to the day before the day insisted on leaving. I did. The lamp dimmed, satisfied to be included. When I stepped out, the sky had not changed. The inside of my eyes had. Another letter room mirrored the first, but faced a different set of thoughts. Unsent letters south. The rule card matched. I wrote nothing this time, sitting with the pencil until the sentence I wasn't writing mellowed on its own. The room accepted unwritten things with equal grace. At exact midspan, a simple pedestal held a flame that didn't point up but inward. Lantern of the middle. I stood beside it and felt how many crossings pause here without announcing they are halfway. The flame didn't require me. That was why it helped. I turned back toward the entrance. The bridge learned my return and shortened itself by the amount of effort I didn't need to spend. Places I had passed shifted their furniture by an inch to fit the person I had become. The stall keeper at the Hush Market nodded at my pouch as if it had always been mine. The garden sent a small wind to walk beside me long enough to be companion. The windows kept their evenings and did not ask me to look again. The letters I had posted were already traveling at the speed that suits tenderness. At last the platform waited, kind and awake. The attendant lifted a hand the way dawn lifts the light. The ticket was warm again in the drawer, exactly where it should be when not in use. I placed my palm on the desk. Wood and skin shared a temperature and were satisfied. I turned once to look back, not to make the bridge important, but to remind the night it had not been wasted. The span held steady, lanterns steady, stations steady, the once unlit lantern now one among many lit ones, giving no more light than it should. Moderation tonight felt like genius. I walked home by the route that had learned me. The door frame accepted my hand, remembering the habit I had reclaimed. I set the small pouch of Let Them Land beside the slip of paper that read, "Rest is not absence." The 2 objects agreed not to make a fuss. The bed remembered me in one breath. Somewhere, a bell crossed the bridge on wind. I trusted the light I had lit to show new travelers their hands, their ticket, and the first rail. No more, which is kindness. Sleep and waking made their exchange. One gentle dream for another, breath for breath, step for step, until morning would find us already across. You've been aboard the bridge between dreams on Stardust Mysteries. New worlds every day. Tap subscribe on the right. Start the next story on the left. Good night, traveler.